A well-designed garden is a way of transporting us to a new, magical place. Creating these amazing spaces inside of a larger garden is an art form in and of itself, and we will be exploring that today. You won't want to miss it, so stay tuned as we garden smart from Georgia.
These moments of beauty and relaxation are brought to you by Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs, where every plant is performance tested, leaving you free to just enjoy. Find our award-winning shrubs at your local garden center.
Now more than ever, our homes are our havens, where we learn, love, and live. Let garden projects, inspired or simple, bring beauty and comfort to you. Wherever you choose to plant good, we're with you.
DRAM has been providing gardeners with professional equipment for over 75 years. DRAM products feature 9 water patterns and are designed to nurture your plants with a shower of rain. DRAM for lawn and garden, available at garden centers near you.
You have to rely on your gear. The way it feels, the way it does exactly what you need it to do. The F-Pace, how Jaguar makes it SUV.
Great garden design is a very thoughtful and personal thing. One must consider the many ways in which the space will be experienced and used, and allow that to inform the way in which it's crafted. To be successful at developing intimate, unique views in garden rooms, there are many things to consider at the outset. We've had the privilege of following garden designer Jim Gibbs through the process of his latest endeavor, the Inspiration Garden. His latest passion project only further punctuates his work as a plantsman and designer and adds yet another amazing space to the 16 existing unique gardens at Gibbs Garden. Jim, it's great to see you again. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Eric. Nice to see you again.
Today we're talking about the design principles that govern creating spaces, intimate spaces, or little garden venues inside of the larger garden. It's one of the things that every time I visit Gibbs Garden I'm so impressed with is your ability to almost effortlessly do that. And so I'm really, really excited to pick your brain and help our viewers understand more how we do that and how we think about that kind of garden design.
Well, I think the spaces at, of course, Gibbs Gardens is 336 acres, and we have a lot of space. And if you have even a little small garden, you can still take that one space, and it's more interesting if you can divide it at least into 2 spaces. And if it's a small walkway or maybe even stepping stones, just a little walk that meanders through there, that gives you a space on the right of the stepping stones or the left, and it could lead to a bench, it could lead to a little recirculating fountain, or a bench and a little fountain. There are all kinds of ways to break it up, but if you create the little spaces, you make it more interesting, and that's what's so important to a garden.
I would go so far as to say, even in like this little snapshot of your garden, there's different garden views. even inside of this planting. And we ought to think about as gardeners, like, you know, with every angle that we view a space, it's an opportunity for a new portrait, you know, to allow for these playful little vignettes throughout the garden really is what makes them fascinating.
Well, as we're standing in this larger space, this space that we're standing in is one of 10 spaces that make up this large space. But in this one space, the boulders that are here, the dwarf dissecta maple, the dwarf ginkgos, the different greens, all these plants are adding interest to this one space. So we want to create something to create the interest to stop, look at me. The plants are saying, look at me. I want you to stop, see me.
When I think back to my first garden, Jim, as I was a young horticulturist, and how I went about the process of putting all that in, it was kind of a haphazard thing. I would go visit these beautiful gardens that I had tremendous respect for, and I was mystified at how they were able to envision that and make it happen on such a scale. And it seemed so daunting. You know, how do they go about the process of figuring it all out? And there was interest around every corner. It just seemed like something that was completely out of grasp. Until all of that started to get pulled down into smaller spaces, and thinking about the garden in terms of every 8 foot by 8 foot or 10 foot by 10 foot section, and then building something cohesive from that.
When I started this garden on the dwarf conifers, we had 200 varieties to come in on 2 big trailers from Portland, Oregon. So once they were unloaded, we put them in an open space fairly close to the conifer garden. What I did was take 4 to 6 individual plants, and I grouped the 4 to 6 plants based on the form, their texture, and their color, and if they needed sun. And I put all the sun-loving groupings in an area for sun. Then I took the ones that needed part sun, and I grouped them in 4 to 6 plants, and they were all in little sections, but in an area for part sun. Then I took the ones that needed part shade, and I grouped those in. And if you do that, you're working, as you go through a garden, your cone of vision only picks up about 4 to 6 plants at one time. So if those 4 to 6 plants have great form, great texture, and great color, and you put another grouping that's totally different next to them, you're creating more interest. If you then take another grouping of 4 to 6 plants and put those next to those you've already placed, it works well. If you were going to a garden center and you were going to select some plants for your garden, and let's say you would select them for a dwarf conifer, you could stay there at the garden center and just take some plants out, 4 to 6 plants, and you know if they are going to be for sun, and you group them over in one little place on the parking lot. And then you get another group of 4 to 6 plants, and you pull them around, you play with them, and you put them in a little grouping of 4 to 6 plants. And then you go to another one. But when you put them all together, you have this magnificent grouping of maybe 24 plants instead of 4 to 6. So your mind can think easier about 4 to 6 plants, even if it's a corner in your garden and you're putting the taller plants in the background. Then you're going to put intermediate plants in front of those, and you're going to put lower plants in front of those. So you get these step levels. You have created much more interest and intrigue for that viewer to go through your garden and appreciate your plant collections.
Absolutely, and once we've established what the personality of the garden is going to be, to break it down into those little squares, because you're right, as we experience a garden, it's almost impossible to see all of it in its totality at one time. And so we're only looking at these little vignettes. And I think that the most exciting gardens are the ones where, as you've said, the gardener was thoughtful about making sure each one of these little groupings, almost like little postage stamps that are interwoven by a common theme, that's what makes for an exciting garden. And this is a wonderful example here. your inspiration garden, where we've got a lot of different types of plants. And I want you to talk about these collections, how you were able to use the design principles of 4 to 6 plants, and then also making the color, texture, and form interweave among these different collections, because it's a fascinating garden to look at.
The collections we have in the new Inspiration Garden, we have the conifer garden, which has over 200 varieties of conifers, all different forms, different textures, different colors. We have, for example, the Encore Azalea collection, 33 varieties, all of their collection, and we have over 1,200 plants, and we have grouped them according to color so that you get the color wheel as you go through, seeing the proper colors next to each other. So as you walk through the garden, you have this kaleidoscope of color that blends one color into the next that harmonizes and works well. The other thing we have are 1,800 native azaleas. And you remember, they're all fragrant. So they bloom in the spring, certain varieties. We have over 100 varieties, 1,800 plants. And as you walk through the garden, you pick up that wonderful fragrance when they're in bloom. And then we have the, for example, the dwarf maples. There's such beautiful, beautiful, rare, unusual dwarf dissectum maples. And we have 100 varieties of those in this new garden. And then on the property, we have over 3,000 Japanese maples, but in this one garden, we've added 125 new varieties to the 300 varieties we already have. So I like to add new varieties each time we do a new collection. So this garden also has the dwarf ginkgos, and we have a collection of all the dwarf ginkgos. But you got to think about, do they need sun? Do they need part sun? Do they need part shade? You can't put a grouping of full sun plants next to a part shade plant. It won't work, they'll die.
Right.
So you got to think in terms of that. So when you go to the nursery or garden center, you got to think about what you're looking for. You got to know your light requirements, and you got to know what zone you live in. So that's important too.
Well, many of the larger collections, you're putting in what is mostly a conifer garden here. One thing that I love about what you've done here is, by using the principles of color, texture, and form, what could be fairly monotonous is not. This is a very exciting garden to experience, and it's because you're thinking about, how do we create these little vistas? How do we create these little groupings of plants that all work together? And so using the Japanese maples as these pops of color, using some tall plants, as like, a focal point of the garden, something to draw our eye down the path and to add interest to it. And you've done such a beautiful job incorporating all that. And so, because that was designed well, a decade from now, 20 years from now, all of this is still going to be so harmonious.
Now, one thing I did add too, when you mentioned color, I have a collection of the Drift series of roses, which are all dwarf roses. Now, I have another series of the Knockout roses, and they're all represented here. They add color spring, summer, and fall of the year. So your color can be mixed in once you get your major groupings. You can come back and add those to work all through the entire garden, and that creates color. And then there are a lot of other plants with color that can be added to all these little groupings of 4 to 6. So it all works together well.
I visited Gibbs Garden for many, many years, and one of the things that makes this garden so exciting for visitors is the fact that you were very thoughtful from the outset of every single garden space you designed here. You were very thoughtful about figuring out the pathways first. And of course, pathways are very, very important here at Gibbs Garden. And you use them as a way of guiding the viewer through the garden. And in that way, you have some degree of control over the experience. But it also is a way of breaking up these gardens and almost framing them with these beautiful gravel pathways.
I like to use a lot of curves, curvilinear design, guides you through, and you feel like it's almost like a stream. It has movement in a stream meandering through a valley. You just can picture the water moving through there. If the walks are moving you, they add to create a lot of interest. So in all of the walks of Gibbs Gardens, they are designed to create interest, and they're also to break up the spaces. As you walk, on the right of you, if you look in that direction, is one space. To the left of you is another space. If it's flat, you still have two spaces. Here, we're on an elevation that changes.
Right.
So we're now, if you look to your right, you're looking down over the tops of plants. If you look to the left, you're looking up at the vertical scale of the plants and the hillside. But they definitely lure you into a garden and create excitement. You want to just keep moving to the next curve. And then when you get there, the next curve will pull you there. But they lure you as you go along and create the excitement that is needed for gardens. Gardens are exciting.
Right.
Plants make it exciting. Paths and walkways make it exciting. Sculptures and added attractions, like gazebos or anything, add interest and create a lot of interest.
Pathways are so important, especially since most gardens don't have these significant elevation changes. The only way that we'd ever be able to view the entirety of the garden would be from like a second-story window. But that's not the way that we experience gardens. We experience gardens, for the most part, on the pathway. And even as I'm looking at this space right here, without the pathways, the garden ends up looking very much like just a swath of like plants and mulch. But the pathway also is a very, very important piece of hardscape, that adds this, beautiful kind of like silver frame that flows through the garden, as you were saying, almost like, a creek bed. It's amazing.
Well, there's nothing worse than a straight path.
Right.
You may have a space on the right or the left, but they're very boring. We're standing here, we can see our sight line takes us only to that curve. Now, when we arrive there, our sight line goes to the next curve. But beyond that, there's more excitement. And look at that, there's more excitement, and there's more excitement. So you really get excited when you're in a garden. And walkways and pathways have to be the first consideration of a garden. Then you work from there.
Jim, it goes without saying that the more we learn and the more experience that we have in gardening, the better we will be at it. And you have a lifetime of knowledge that's been accumulated over decades of being a great designer and a great plantsman. What are some of the things that have been helpful to you in that journey?
Of course, reading, checking all the new books, checking websites, viewing websites. I've traveled the world. I've seen all the great gardens. I wanted to build a world-class garden. But as I look back, for example, on the conifer garden, Tom Cox is a person that I consulted with. He lives close. He knows Zone 7 and 8. And he has a book out that's called Landscaping with Conifers and Ginkgo for the Southeast. And Tom Cox and John Rutter wrote the book. It's probably the only book for the Southeast if you're looking for conifers for the Southeast. But there are many, many conifer books if you want to go to all the other conifer gardens. It depends on what plant collection you're trying to think about. You might want to check a book on plant collections for azaleas, another one for conifers, another one for dwarf maples, another one for native azaleas. Then you put them all together, your knowledge.
Right.
You're going to gain such tremendous knowledge by reading books and going to the internet. But on the internet, you see the plants and you see the sizes, the shapes, and the forms. It's very, very easy today when I think back when I graduated from the University of Georgia and what little there was to see. We had no internet then.
Right.
And everything had to be through books, but you don't have the same experience. Today, everything is Google this or Google that, and you've got it in seconds. And you can look at what the plant looks like in the spring, summer, fall, and winter, which is great.
It's a tremendous resource. Of course, you've got a brand new book that's come out that I'm really, really excited to get into this evening. And I think also consulting with experts. You know, you mentioned, you know, Tom's involvement here. I know that many of our other friends like Brent Marcus, you know, and Buddy with Encore that were involved in this project were also very instrumental in kind of the brain trust of making all this come together the way it has.
You need, I think, to consult with people that are more professional and better than you. I've been in this for over 50 years. There's no question I needed Tom Cox for selection of plants. I needed Brent Marcus for the selection of the dwarf maples, and of course some of the conifers also. Buddy Lee with the Encore azaleas, I had to talk with him because I have such a huge collection.
Right.
But I can't imagine undertaking any garden design to be on. You know, we're one of the best botanical garden, American botanical gardens. And to be in that category with Longwood Gardens, and those gardens that have been there for over 100 years.
Wow.
But I went back and looked at their garden designs 100 years ago and gained knowledge from them to build this garden that is only 35 years old. The one advantage to being older is you have more wisdom. I've learned more and I have only wisdom. I may not be any smarter than you, but I've got more wisdom than you. And that's because I'm a lot older. But I do think people need to research. You just got to spend time, and it's enjoyable.
Sure.
You spend many hours researching.
Right. We're doing what we love.
That's right.
Jim, it's always a treat having you share your knowledge with us, and it's great seeing you again. Thank you so much.
Eric, it's so much fun seeing you every time you come. Great to be with you again. Thanks.
Thank you. Each week we travel the country north to south, east to west, visiting some of the most exciting gardens, as well as talking to industry horticulturalists about design principles, new plants, and also how you can be most successful with your home gardens. We also love answering your gardening questions, so visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com.
These moments of beauty and relaxation are brought to you by Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs, where every plant is performance tested, leaving you free to just enjoy. Find our award-winning shrubs at your local garden center.
Now more than ever, our homes are our havens, where we learn, love, and live. Let garden projects, inspired or simple, bring beauty and comfort to you. Wherever you choose to plant good, we're with you.
DRAM has been providing gardeners with professional equipment for over 75 years. DRAM products feature 9 water patterns and are designed to nurture your plants with a shower of rain. DRAM for lawn and garden, available at garden centers near you.
You have to rely on your gear. The way it feels, the way it does exactly what you need it to do. The F-Pace, how Jaguar makes an SUV.
There are so many things to consider when designing and building a new garden, but keeping in mind some simple, foundational tips, we're able to set ourselves up for success. We return to Gibbs Gardens next week to discuss installing the plants and fine-tuning our design. If you have questions about anything you've seen today, visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. And remember, even if you're a master gardener, there's always more to learn. So join us next week for more great gardening tips and ideas as we garden smart.